When I was 19 with 3 years left to my degree, I landed my first software developer job. And the only reason I even got the interview for that job was because of my e-portfolio. 1 year later, I landed a 6-figure job at a top tech company, and one of the main reasons why I even landed that interview was again because of my e-portfolio. In this video, I'm going to be showing you how you can build a very good looking e-portfolio that will impress interviewers and will help you land jobs. If you watch this video, you're going to be learning things like responsive designs, animations, transitions, CSS layout, all of the important things you need to know to build your own website and land jobs. If you're watching this, I'll highly recommend coding along with the video. And if you get stuck at any point, in the description below, there's a GitHub link, and that's where you'll find all the code. Before we get started, none of this is going to work if you don't like the video. So make sure you like the video and let's get straight into it. So for this, I'm just going to be using Visual Studio Code. So I'm just going to start off with an empty file on my desktop by pressing this open button. And I'm just going to select the empty folder and press open. So for this tutorial, I'm going to be using two main extensions, and the first one's going to be called Emmet, and it's just this Mithril Emmet extension, and the next one is going to be called Live Server, and it's just this one by Ritwig Day. I probably butchered that name, but that's what you have to download. So after that, just create a new file, index.html, and with Emmet you can just use this keyboard shortcut, ! And it gives you this nice boilerplate. And you can write down your name, and this is the code. So if you don't have that shortcut, you can literally just copy this out word for word. So next we're just going to test something. So write test in the body, and let's open the live server. And you can see it actually says test here, which is pretty cool. And now let's just add a CSS file. So we'll go link, and we'll create, it's not created yet, but we'll create a styles.css. So once you add this file, you can check if it turns red, and you can see it turns red. So that's how we know the file is actually getting included correctly. Before we start, I actually want to get this Lato font. So we go to Google Fonts, and we type in Lato. We click Lato, and we get 400, and we get 700. And then we click this import button, and we just copy the import link, and we paste it at the top of the page. Cool. So now we can test the font family. We can actually just copy it from here. And you can see if it works. So you can see when I hover over it, it says Lato right over here, which is beautiful. So next I'm just going to put my default styling. So I'm going to reset the padding on everything, because you can see there's some margin, and I don't like how the default elements have margin. So I like controlling that myself. So I'm just going to reset that to 0, and I prefer border box because in my opinion it's very easy to style with border box. I'm now going to set all the heading colors and put some default styling on the headings. So H1 all the way to H6, including the span. I'm going to make this dark color. I'm going to add a centering text for my titles and at a line height of 1.25. And for my paragraph tag, I'm going to have a line height of 1.5 and a font size of 16 pixels by default. Awesome, so now we can start working on this navigation bar at the top. So I'll just zoom in so you can see everything properly. So let's add a section. And we'll add an ID of About Me. And if you press enter using this shortcut, Emmet will do that for you. And now let's see what I actually did. So on the right, you can see I had a nav, and then inside the nav, I have my personal logo, and then an unordered list. And you can see it's separated to both sides, and that's because I use display flex and justify content space between. So without these two, that wouldn't work. So let's just copy that over. So we have a nav, and we have a personal logo, and we said David Bragg. And next we have an unordered list, and we'll have a class of nav link list. And I'm using BEM CSS, by the way. So if you want to look into that, it's this block element modifier methodology. It's very good for writing CSS. I highly recommend reading into that. And That's why you see these underscores and hyphens that I'm using. So next we're going to have our links, and we're going to have, inside the links, we're going to have our anchor tags. That's to actually link all the elements. So you can see when I press this, it comes down to the languages section. So we'll leave that out for now. We'll come back to that. And the classes we're going to add are navlink anchor. And we'll just create a new line for these. So navlink anchor link hover effect. And when it's two words in one element, we just use one hyphen instead of two. And link hover effect. And now it's the modifier, so we use two hyphens, black. And write languages inside this. And you can actually see we have one link, languages, which is pretty cool. Now let's just copy this 3 times because we have 3 different links here. So Shift Option down on Mac or copy paste. We'll call this one projects. Command D to select the whole word, and we'll call this one contact. Now this one you see it's a different class. So because it's styled differently, it's a primary call to action button. So instead of these classes, we're gonna still keep the anchor there, but we'll add a primary class to this. So that's our HTML done. Now let's go to the CSS, and let's just specify that we're working on the navigation bar. So just to make it easier to see the different sections. And now we're going to have the navigation height 100 pixels. We're going to have a max width of 1000 pixels, and we're going to set the width to 100% so it's responsive. So now you can see it's actually 1000 pixels wide, but it's not centered. To center it, we just add margin 0 auto. So now it's centered nicely. Now let's position it. So we want to use display flex and then justify content space between. So that'll send it to both sides of the page. And we'll do align items center to center it vertically. Now we need to do the same thing for this unordered list. As you see, they're on top of each other. So what's the class called? Navlink list. Just paste that here. And we'll go display flex. So now you can see they're side by side. And just to remove that ugly bullet point, just go up here to our default styling, go to the list element, and list style type none is what we're after. And you can see the bullet points disappear. So now we actually want to style the links. So let's see what styles we use. So if we press this, we can see there's a margin of 0.12 between them just to separate them, because without that, they'll be squished together. Text decoration, none. Font size 16, color black, and bold. So we'll just write that down here. So target the navlink anchor. Margin 0.12 pixels, and I'll show you what it's doing over here. So you can see it's separated. We'll set the color to black or close to black. Text decoration, none, to remove the underline. And font weight 700. If you remember, we imported the 700 font at the top over here. So we'll just target that, and that sets it to bold. So now we need to change the contact button. So you can see, obviously the color is white. The background's this purpley color. So let's target the class, navlink anchor primary. We'll set a background color to it right now so you can see what's happening. So the hex is 603 0B1. Now we want to add some padding to it. So 8 pixels on the top and bottom, 20 pixels on the left and right. We'll set a border radius to curve the edges. We'll set the color of the text to white, and that's looking good. If you notice one thing, when you hover over it, it turns into this different color. So what we want to do is we actually want to target this color instead. So we can press this hover and use this. So to do that, you just target the same class, navlink anchor primary, but at the end of that, you just write hover and you change the background color.
So you can see now when we hover over it, it shifts colors. But you can see it's instant. Just to make it transition smoothly, we'll just add a transition. So now you can see it's very smooth. So now let's just get this ugly personal logo out of the way. So we can target it. We see the font size is bigger. So we'll just add that down here. Personal logo, font size, 24 pixels. And we have that purpley color, 6030B1. And we still want a margin just for the smaller resolution. So 0 on the top and bottom, 12 pixels on the left and right, as you can see. And we'll just make that font bold. Cool, that's looking good. And now that's our navigation done. So let's now move on to the next section. And for this section, we're going to have this row. So in order to do this, we're going to start off by using a few assets. And I'm sure you don't want to use my picture, but if you do, for some reason, the link's in the description. So I'm just going to move this assets folder that's linked in the description. I'm going to move it here, copy folder. So now you can see all these assets are in this file. So now let's see how I actually solve this. So at the start, I have a flex and flex 1. This is just to make it the entire height of the page, because you can see without flex 1, it stops here. So we want that the entire height of the page. And then inside that, we have a row that actually contains the page. So you can see this is capped. And that's capped at 800 pixels. And then inside that we have two sections. So we have our About Me information container, and then we have the figure that contains our image. So let's just write this quickly in the HTML. So over here, inside the section outside of the navigation, we're gonna first include the div, which is what you see here. And we'll add the classes later, but that's just to make it the entire height of the page. And then we're going to add another div, which is going to be this information row you're seeing. So dot about me info, and then we're going to add a second class called row to that. So inside this row we have two different sections. We have our information container, and then we have the image. So let's just add the information container first. So about me info container. And inside this container, we're going to have our image that's wrapped inside a figure. And the source is going to be inside the assets folder, and it's called me.jpg. You can add an alternate property for the screen readers. So we'll just go to picture of me. Cool. And now let's just add a class to the figure. And we'll call this class about me picture. We'll say it's the mask, and you'll see why later. Now we want to add the heading. So I'm just going to copy this. And this is an emoji, by the way. You can literally just copy this as well. So copy it inside the header tag. Hey, I'm David Bragg. And we'll call the header tag about me info title. And you can see this text is purple. So in order to do that, we just add a span around the David Bragg. And we'll close it here. And we'll add a class to it. It's text purple. So let's see what this looks like. If I refresh the page, oh, something died. Start the live server again. All right, so when we refresh the page, we get this beautiful image. So that's cool. Let's just add a paragraph tag before we style it. So I'm just gonna copy and paste from here. You feel free to add your own text. If it's your ePortfolio, then I highly do not recommend copying this and instead writing your own. So we're going to call the class to this paragraph about me info para. And you can see again there's some purple text and it's bold, so it's around the front end software engineer. We just want to emphasize that. I'm just going to call a strong tag and wrap it around here. And we'll add a class to it called text purple. Now let's see what this looks like. And we refresh the page. All right, cool. Now let's just style it so it doesn't look so ugly. So let's see what we need to do. So we have this container, we have a row, and we have a div. So first and foremost, you can see this isn't the entire height of the page. So what we want to do, we actually want to target this about me ID. And we'll target that after the nav. So just over here, we'll add about me, and let's target this. I will call it a minimum height. We want the minimum height to be 100 vertical height. So now you can see it's the entire height of the page. Now we want to add a display flex and flex direction column, just so we can do what I'm about to do next. So now we target this div you're looking at right now, this one over here. I'll add a class called flex1. So I'll show you what this does. So we'll add it to the general classes. So just add flex1. I'll add a dot here, flex1. So now when we go here, you can see it's now the entire height, which is beautiful. So now to get its child 100% height, all we need to do is display flex it. So we'll add another class called flex, and this will be reusable, so you can just add it in the general area and add display flex. And now you can see the child is also 100% of the height. Okay, so now what we need to do is make it not look so ugly. So now let's target the about me info container. So we'll go down here, about me info container. I will add a display flex justify content center, so JCC if you're using Emmet. We'll do a flex direction column so they're not side by side, and we'll also align it center. Cool. And by the way, because it's flex direction column, align center now centers it horizontally instead of justify content. So you can see it spans the whole width of the page. Let's just cap that. So we added a class row to this. So now we can just target the class, and this is again going to be generic class that's going to be reusable. So we'll set the width to 100%, but this time we're going to cap it at 800 pixels. So you can see it's not the entire width of the page, and we're just going to center it using margin 0 auto, like that. So the next step, let's fix this image. So we called it about me picture mask. And while we're here, I'm just going to add a class here and call it to the image and call it about me picture. So let's copy this mask, the wrapper of the image, and we'll target it down here. And let's see what width and height we used. So we use 100 and 100. So the width is 100 pixels, the height is 100 pixels. And let's just see what that looks like. Okay, that looks like shit. And that's because the about me picture is not 100% of its parent. So now it is. So now let's just add a border radius of 50%. And we'll do the overflow hidden to hide everything else. And now it's centered perfectly. But I actually want to zoom into my picture personally. So down here, I'm just going to write improving my own picture. And let's just go transform. We'll scale it by 1.5, see what that looks like. That looks all right. And let's just add some padding to the top so my head doesn't come out of the frame. And we'll add some 8 pixels. And by the way, for this, I like doing increments of 4 pixels. Before we move on, I'm just going to add a box shadow to this picture. So we'll go 0, 8, 16 and RGBA this shade of black, just for a very subtle shade you see there. And if you put this 1, you can see what's happening. The 8 pixels is pushing it down. The 16 is blurring it, as you can see. And I'm also going to add a margin bottom to this. So 28 pixels, just to create this gap you're looking at right here. And if you remembered, we added some text purples. So let's just copy this class and we'll add it up here into the generics. So text purple, and the purple color we're using is #6030B1. Feel free to use your own color schemes, by the way, but for this tutorial, I'm using this purple. And now let's fix the font size for this. So the H1, we'll add this in the generics, H1, we'll put, let's see what 36 pixels looks like. All right, that's looking good. If we go to this page, you can see what we did over here. So to the About Me paragraph, let's just double check if we added that class. Yes, we did. So we'll copy this and add it down here. And the font size is going to be 20 pixels. The line height is 1.5, which we actually already wrote up here, which is nice. So we don't need to write that. We're going to add a 28 pixels margin bottom. And let's see what this looks like now. All right, cool. It's coming together pretty nicely. Let's just add a margin bottom to this title. So About Me info title. And that's too much, so let's just bring it down a bit. Again, increments of 4, and that's looking much better. I'm actually not a fan of how wide this is. So let's target the container again. And we'll add a max width to it. And let's add a max width of 500 pixels. And that's looking better. And now we'll just center it. Margin 0 auto. Just like that. And let's just increase it a bit more. All right, there we go. Now let's just center the text of all of the container's children using this. And that's looking pretty good. Now let's add some fun, awesome icons that you see over here. So for that, we're just going to go all the way to the top. Under the link, we're going to write script and just copy what I write word letter for letter. So https kit.fonawesome.com/C8E4D183C2.js. And I'll just memorize that from using it so many times. Cross origin anonymous. And now we can actually go to the Font Awesome website and import some icons. So for these, we're going to use the LinkedIn, GitHub, Mail, and PDF. So LinkedIn, search for it, and we can just copy from here, copy the icon. Let's just paste it anywhere and see if it actually works. And you can see the icons popping up, which is cool. So let's just go back. And after this p tag, we want to add our links. So About Me links. And each link is going to have an anchor. And let's just write LinkedIn here. And we'll have a few more links. We'll add a class called About Me link to these. And we'll copy this 3 times. 1, 2, 3. And this one's going to be your GitHub profile. You can do anything. This is what I'm doing. So I'm having GitHub. I'm having my email. So this one's envelope. And then the final one is the PDF for your resume. And you're going to see some links that aren't actually there. And that's because I copied it incorrectly. So this one's far and this one's fast for regular and solid. And this one for B for brands. So now all our icons are there and they're freaking tiny. So let's increase the size of them. So About Me link. We'll change it by using font size and we'll use 20 pixels. And why is that not working? It's because I write the class name wrong. There we go. We'll set the color to black. And you see these weird underlines and that gets rid of this. So now let's just add some padding between them to space it out. So 16 on the left and right, and that's looking pretty good now. So comparing it to this, you can see it looks pretty much the same. So for the next part, we're just going to add this image, and I'll show you something pretty cool. If you go to undraw.co and you go browse now, you get a bunch of things that you can search for. So you can even change the color, and you can save it as a PNG, SVG. So that's where I got it from. And it's all absolutely for free. But I have it in my assets over here already. So I'm just going to, I called it undraw websites. So I'm just going to call it after this div. So we'll add a figure with a class of About Me image container. And inside that, we're going to have an image, if I can spell, with an asset of the undraw websites. Cool. Let's see if this works. And you can see there's our image. Okay, so now we want to make the figure the entire height, the entire rest of the height. So all we have to do is target this about me info class. So go back up here, about me info. And we're going to use the same flexbox trick. So we're going to go display flex, flex direction column. And now what this lets us do is go to our figure, which we called about me image container. And if we add that down here, and if we do flex 1, you're going to see the figure, the entire height of the page. So now what we want to do is actually center the image inside of this. So we go display flex, align item center. Bam! How easy is Flexbox? But now you can see the image sort of coming outside of that figure. So what we want to do is target the image and we'll add a width 100% of the parent. What the fuck? And why is that not working? It's because I didn't even add the class here. There we go. So now it's not coming outside of the parent. And that's our landing page done. So with display flex, we got to do everything pretty easily. And now if you resize it, it actually works pretty nicely because I didn't use hard-coded values. I used width 100%. We'll come back to the mobile resolution later and fix it up. So in the next section, we're going to be adding the languages. So let's just add another section here and we'll call an ID languages. Now let's break down what's actually inside of this container. So we have a section and then we have a container with padding just to break up the text and the pictures. And let's see what's inside this container. So we have a row to cap the width of it because without this, it just looks like shit. So we need to cap it with a max width. And inside of the row, we just have individual languages and they're just 25% width each, just to make it nice and even. So let's get coding. We're gonna have a container and then inside of that container, we're gonna have a row. Now inside of the row, we're gonna have the h1 tag where we're gonna say this is my technology stack. And we'll add a class called section title so we can reuse it for other sections like this one. And next up, we're gonna have a language list. And inside of this, we're just gonna have a language, which is gonna be the individual ones. Inside each language, we're gonna have a figure which wraps our image, and then we're gonna have an image. The figure class, let's call it language image container or image wrapper. And then this one, we'll call it language image. Now to get the links of the images, I'm just gonna copy it from here, but you can get it from online, or you can actually save the image and then put it in your assets and then import it from here. But I'm just gonna get the SRC from the file I linked in the description. I'm going to paste it here and let's see if it comes up. Awesome. So we get this nice HTML image. But you can see over here, I actually have a gray background. And that's because for the even sections, you can see I have a different background color. So I'm just going to copy this CSS and paste it here. And I'll put it in the generics again. So just above the navigation. So we have a section. For every second section, it's going to be a gray background color. So you can see this is 1, this is 2, this is 3. And if I had a 4th section, then they'll automatically be a gray background color. And that's how you write reusable code. So going back to our code, we just need to add some padding now for the container. So let's go to our CSS and find our container. We don't have one, so we'll add it in the generics. And we'll add a 50 pixels top and bottom and 0 and get some nice white space between our elements. Next up, let's just add some margin bottom to this section title. So again, in the generics, because we want to reuse this, so section title, I'll add a margin bottom of 20 pixels and save this. And now you can see there's a gap between these elements. Now what we want to do is make the image a bit smaller. So let's make a new section called text stack. And then target the image. So what did we call the image? You can see here, language image. And we'll make a width of first we'll make it 100% and then we'll cap it at 100 pixels. Again, this makes it responsive. And now we'll add a width of 25 pixels to the wrapper. 25%, sorry. And let's see what this looks like. So now you can see it's 25% of the width. And now let's just center it. So display flex, JCC, justify content center, align it in the middle vertically as well. And now it's centered beautifully. And we can go over here and we can duplicate these languages. 1, 2, 3, 4, and let's see what it looks like. All right, so now they're stacked on top of each other. In order to get them stacked horizontally, again, we'll use display flex. So if you can't tell already, I love display flex. I use it every single day at work, and it's very convenient. So if you don't know how to use Flexbox, I highly recommend looking up tutorials and getting good at it. So we'll target our language list, display flex, and I don't know what the hell happened here, but they're aligned horizontally. And the reason why that happened is because our wrapper isn't the whole width of the page. So when you add width 100%, all right, psych. All right, my bad. I figured out why. It's because the 25% was on this wrapper, but it's actually supposed to be on the language itself. Because we want it, the parent isn't the wrapper, the parent is the language. So now you can see it's looking nice. We can add 4 more and you can see 1, 2, 3, 4. You can see it all stacks horizontally, but we don't want that. And how to fix that is you go to the wrapper of the languages. So let's see what we called it. We got the language list. Oh, fuck. All right, we got the language list over here. So flex wrap. And if we wrap this, then it will look pretty good. But now you can see it's all squashed together, and I don't really like that. So let's go to the wrapper and add some padding around it. 25 top and bottom, 16 left and right. And that's looking much better. So now let's work on getting the hover effect that we see here. So for this, it's actually not as hard as you think. All we have to do is go over here and target the language image. And we're going to say on hover, when we hover over it, we want to change the brightness of it. And we'll only make it 80%. We're going to make the opacity lighter, so 0.86. And we're going to scale it down a bit. So we're going to make it look smaller. And we'll scale it down by 10%. So now when we hover over it, you can see we're getting some cool effect. And to make it not look shit, you just go here, transition or make it transform in 300 milliseconds. Ease just smooths it out. You don't need this. You still get a cool effect. But that's how you do that. All right, so the next part, it's going to be a bit tricky if you're a beginner and you're not too sure how animations work, but I'll try to explain it my best so you can understand it. So let's go to the HTML. And after each figure, for this, I'm just going to press Command D to target everything. And after the figure, we're going to write span, language, name. And then inside the language name, I'm going to call it HTML. And let's see what that looks like. So we have HTML after each element, but we don't want this actually affecting any other elements on the page. You can see this is affecting the size of this box, but we don't want that. And to fix that, we have to position it absolutely. So let's target this language name in our CSS. So go dot language name and position absolute. And this makes it where you can see now, it's actually not affecting the parent's size, which is what we want. So now to center it, we're going to target its parent, which is .language. We're going to display flex, justify content center, and you can see that centers it. But we want it at the bottom, so we're going to go bottom 0. And you can see this goes crazy, and I'll tell you why. It's because this isn't position relative. It's not relative to anything. Now it's relative to its parent. So you can see it's bottom 0 to this. But if I don't have this, it's bottom 0 to this page. So it's at the bottom of this page because the next relative thing is its parent. So that's why we need position relative right here. So it's looking at the parent. It's looking at the relative parent, which is this. This is the closest relative parent, and it's going to bottom 0 of that. So now let's look at the effect that we're getting. So we're getting this zooming in effect. And to get that, I'll show you what you have to do. So you go to the language name, transform. We're going to start off with a scale of 0. But then when we hover over the language, when we hover over its parent, we're going to target the language name. And now we're going to scale it back to normal. So I'll show you what this does. So now you can see it's scaled 0 because we're not hovered over the language. As soon as we hover over it, it pops up. And now let's just add a transition to make it smoother. So all 300 milliseconds. And now you can see it looks a bit better. But there's a small bug because when we hover outside of it, this doesn't actually activate. This only activates when you hover directly over it. So let's just change that quickly. And to change that, all we have to do is go when we hover over the language, that's when we target the image. So we make this. So as soon as we hover over the language, then we target the image. And now, that's how you get this effect. Let's just make the font size a bit bigger, and we'll make it 20 pixels. And bang, that's how you do that. You can also transition some other things. So if you want to fade it in as well while scaling it, you can put this opacity 1 while you put this opacity 0. So let's see what this looks like. So now it kind of fades in while it's zooming in. It's very subtle, but I think it looks better. So just to finish off, let's just add some purple text around the technology stack. So we go span. Oh shit. Take this to the other side. Class equals text purple. And now you can see, this is my technology stack, bang, bang, looks beautiful. So now all you have to do is replace these images with your technologies. So you can have either 4, I recommend having 4, so you can have HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and React. But yeah, you want at least 4 in my opinion before applying to jobs. So once that section is done, we can move on to my favorite section. And this is where we're going to show off our projects. So let's go back to our HTML, add a section tag. And we're going to add an ID of projects. And inside this section, again, we're going to add a container. That's to add padding on the top and bottom. And then we're going to add a row to cap the left and right of it, to add a max width to the sides. As you can see, this is the row. So without the max width, it just stretches infinitely, so we don't want that. And inside the row, we're going to have our section title. So class. Do you remember the reusable class that we had before? This is when that comes in handy. Here are some of my projects. And we want projects to be in purple. So we'll just add a span of class text purple. And close it after the projects. Let's see what this looks like. Refresh the page. Beautiful. Now you can really start to see the importance of using reusable classes. So next up, let's see what we need to do. So we have a list, we have an unordered list, and inside that we have a list of projects. So let's just create that in the HTML. So inside the row, we're going to write UL with a class of project list. And then inside of that, we're going to have an li of a project class. Now let's create a div that wraps the entire project. And inside of that, we're going to have our image, which I put in the description, but this is where you want to use your own images of your projects. And we're just going to take this from the root directory, from the assets, and I called it loopit.png. And let's just add a class as project image. And you can also add an alt tag for the screen readers if you wanted to. But most likely, if you're doing this for recruiters, they're not going to be using screen readers, so it's not a big deal. So I'm just going to call it car subscription project. And let's save it and see what it looks like. All right, so this is a monster image. And let's see what's happening. So we have a project wrapper. That's the correct width, but the image is overflowing it. So all we have to do is add a width of 100% to this image to set it to 100% of this parent's width. So let's see what this does. All right, there we go. And one thing I just want to do quickly is add projects to separate our sections in CSS. So now we just need that border around it like we did here. So let's just see what CSS we used. So we put a box shadow around it, and then we added a border radius, and we created the overflow of hidden, and I'll show you what that does. So first let's target this class. So dot project wrapper. Now let's add the box shadow. So 0 pixel offset horizontally, 20 pixel offset vertically, 80 pixel blur, and we can lighten the intensity of that. So we'll do 4.5, see what this looks like. It's looking better. Now let's add some smooth edges around the corners. So we need to add a border radius to add some smooth edges. And you can see that didn't do anything because we're targeting this wrapper, but the image is overflowing it. So in order to prevent that, all we need to do is write overflow hidden, and that prevents the overflow. You can also tell that the image isn't the entire size of the parent container. And to fix that, we'll just use display flex, and now it's fixed. So now when we hover over it, we want to create this dark background that you're seeing. So in order to do that, let's go back here, duplicate this class, remove the CSS inside of it, and add a before pseudo selector. Now when you're using pseudo classes, you always have to set the content of it. And what we're going to do is we're going to position it absolutely because we don't want this affecting the position of anything. So position absolute, top 0, left 0, height 100% of its parent, width 100% of its parent, background color, we'll set it to 1C, 1D25. And if you look up here, you can see it. And if you remember before, that's because the position relative wasn't on the parent. So all we need to do is add position relative to this, and it will be top 0 and left 0 to its parent. So as soon as we add position relative, that's what it looks like. But we obviously want to see the image. So what we're going to do is we're going to default it to opacity 0. And when we hover over the wrapper, so we'll copy this wrapper class. So what we want to do is when we hover over the project, we want to target the before pseudo selector on the project wrapper. And this is when we're going to change the opacity. So now the opacity, when we hover over it, let's do 0.7. And let's see what this looks like. So you can see it's not completely removing the image. We can still see it. That's because the opacity isn't 1. Now in order to make it a smoother transition, all we need to do, transition 450 milliseconds ease. And in my opinion, it's best practice to actually state what we're transitioning. So here we're transitioning the opacity, and there we go. So let's compare this to what we have here. So you can see this one, it kind of blurs the image in the background and it zooms in a bit. So in order to achieve that, again, we're going to go project on hover. And let's target the image this time. And we're going to say when we hover over the project, let's scale the image. Let's make it a bit bigger. So transform scale. Let's increase it by 7%. And we'll add a filter on it and we'll blur it to add this cool effect. And let's see if this works. So go back to our page, hover over it, and you see it blurring and zooming in a bit. Now let's just transition this so it's not instant. So transition, or let's say 500 milliseconds, and we'll ease it. And let's see what this looks like. Looking better. Now, I don't know if you noticed, but we're not actually seeing this background color that we're setting here. And that's because the Z index is actually below it. So what we want to do, we want to go to this project wrapper, and we'll just increase the Z index a bit, and let's see what this does. That didn't do anything because we put on the wrong class. We have to do it in the before pseudo selector because that's what we want over it, and that's looking much better. Before we move on, I'm just going to quickly add some padding on top of this because I don't like how close it is to the title. So we'll just add a project list class, and we'll add some padding on top of it. So padding top, 40 pixels, and there we go. So now let's work on getting some text to show. So we want the title, we want the subtitle, we want some paragraph text, and then we want some links. So let's go back to our HTML. And just after the image tag, we're going to add a div with a project description. And then inside this, we're going to have a project description title, which is a H3. And we'll say car sales project. And then we'll add a H4 with a class of project description subtitle. Again, if it's 2 words, then it's 1 hyphen. And here you just write your technology stack you use, so HTML, CSS, JavaScript, Vue, and Vuex is what I use for it. Next, we're going to have a paragraph, and the class will be project description. We'll call it para. And I'm just going to get some dummy text. I'm just going to copy this over and format that. By the way, if you format it, just go format document, and it will format it for you automatically. Next, we want to add some links. So as you see, we have the GitHub and we have the link to the site because we hosted it, and we want our recruiter to see the site that we spent some hard work on. So we'll add a div, project description, and we'll call this links. And inside of that, let's have an anchor tag. And this is where you want to link your GitHub. So it will be something like www.github.com/your link. And let's add a class to that, and we'll call it project description link with no S. And inside of that, we're going to have the I tag, and you get this from Font Awesome from their website. So this is going to be the brands FA GitHub. And we can duplicate this, and now we want solids and FA link. And this is going to be your website. When the recruiter clicks the link, if you want it to open up in a new tab, all you have to do is add a target equals underscore blank, and they'll open it up in a new tab for them. So now let's see what this looks like. And we can't see anything. That's because we didn't style it. So let's see what we need to do. Let's see where it is first and foremost. So it's on the right, and we don't want it on the right. We actually want it over our image. And again, we need to use position absolute because we don't want this to affect the size of anything else on the page. We want this to be independent of everything. So add a class project description, position absolute, and now you can see our text. So now let's center it in the middle. So top 50% and translate Y negative 50% to center it with the position absolute. We don't want to write on the left, so we'll push it to the right a bit by 90 pixels. Now let's add a max width to it. And we'll create 550 pixels. And now all we need to do is just push the text to the left. So we need to target each class we have. So that's the project description title and subtitle. And for both of these classes, we want text aligned to the left. And we'll make the color of them white. And we'll also do it for the paragraph too. And looks like we missed a link, so we'll add it to the link as well. So project description links. Actually, just one link. There we go. So now our text is white, but we can't see anything because the background's a Z index of 2. So all we need to do is add a Z index of 3 and put it over it. And now the project description is over it. So now let's just play around with the font sizes. So we'll take this project description title And we'll add a font size of 40 pixels. We'll add some margin to the top and bottom of this paragraph. 16 pixels to the top and bottom, 0 to the left and right. We'll increase the size of our links as well. So project description link. We'll add a font size of 20 pixels. And we'll separate them. We'll go margin right 16 pixels. And you see this little underline? That's actually from the text decoration of the anchor tag. So all we need to do is go no text decoration. And the underline goes. So that's looking good, but you can see the text is actually over the image and we don't want that. And the solution we're going to do is we're going to start off with an opacity of 0 when we're not hovered over it. So let's go to the project description. We'll add an opacity of 0. And when we hover over the project, that's when we want the opacity to be 1. So project hover, that's when we want to see the project description. So on hover, project description, opacity 1. And let me spell opacity, opacity 1. And let's check what this does. Beautiful. Now I don't like how it instantly appears, so let's just add a transition onto the project description. So we'll transition the opacity and we'll transition it by 300 milliseconds and see if this helps. Much better. Now let's compare it to this. And you can see this, the text actually moves up. And in order to do that, it's actually much easier than you think. All we need to do is copy this transform translate Y. So this actually puts it in the center. This positions it perfectly. So copy this, and we only want it in the correct position when we're hovering over the project. So you want to paste it in this class. And let's see what this looks like. And it looks exactly the same. And that's because we're starting at the perfect position, but we don't want to. We want to start a bit down. So now you can see it does this weird jump, and that's because we're not actually transitioning it. So transition will also transform. We'll do this in 450 milliseconds, and let's see what this does. Absolutely nothing, because we need a comma after this when we have 2 separate transitions. And there we go, there's our effect. So now all we have to do is literally get this list item, copy it, and paste it. And you have to do this as many projects as you have. I recommend having 3 projects if you're applying to companies. So once you paste it, you can see them directly on top of each other, and we don't like that. So let's just add some padding, and we'll add some padding onto this list item. So let's go to our CSS, find our project class. We don't have one, so we'll add it. And we'll do margin bottom and 135 pixels. And we want some nice white space between them, because you see the box shadow, it actually looks bigger than it is. So now with this nice white space, it gives the user some nice room, and it gives them time to view each of your projects. So if we scroll to the bottom, you can see there's actually a monstrous space down here. So in order to fix that, all we have to do is target the last child. And we'll only put a margin bottom of 40 pixels for this, and that fixes that issue. So let's just check if the links work. Oops, that doesn't work, and that's because we forgot the HTTPS in front of it. So once we add this, it should be sweet. And we also need to do that for all of them. So target the wwws and add a HTTPS before it. And there we go. Now it sends you to the GitHub. So obviously you want to change the HTML here. You want your different projects. So this one's going to be a dashboard. And you might use a different technology stack, so you just change the HTML. But it's really reusable code. So whenever you have a new project, all you have to do is copy, paste it, and change the HTML, and it'll just add it to the bottom of the page. All right, now we're going to move on to the footer. And if you made it to this section, congratulations, because the hard part is done. So for this footer, let's just go after the section. We're just going to be semantic and write footer. And we're going to have a row. And inside of the row, we're going to have our logo, and when we click the logo, we're going to go to the top of the page. So what we want to do is we want an anchor for that, and the href is going to be hash to send us to the top of the page. And inside this anchor, we're going to have a figure, and then we're going to have an image, and the image src is going to be my logo, and I called it logo.svg. But this is your logo, or you can just take one from the internet. And after the anchor tag, we're going to have our social links. So we're going to have a div with a footer social list. And inside of this, we're going to have a tags. And inside the href, you want links to your GitHub, LinkedIn, and email. And I'll show you how to do the resume where you click it and it opens up a new tab. So the recruiter can see your resume straight away and they can download it if they want it to. So let's just add a few classes to this anchor tag. So we're going to write class equals, and we'll have a footer social link. We'll have a link hover effect, one hyphen, because it's one word. And we'll have a link hover effect white. We also want to keep them on our page. So if they click a link, we want to target underscore blank to open up a new tab for them so they can come back to our website easily. So in the href, this is where you want to write the link to your website. I'll just write google.com and target underscore blank. And let's see what this looks like. Refresh the page. And you can barely see anything. That's because the footer's background color is white. So we're going to get 242424 background color. So let's go to our styles all the way at the bottom. Create a footer separator, and then we're going to target the footer background color hashtag 2424. And there we go. Now we see the white color. Now let's see why this image is so big. So the figure is absolutely massive, and that's because the image is massive. So let's target the image, and let's check what we call the link. And we actually don't have a class of the image, so we'll add a class. And we'll call it footer logo image, just like this. And we'll copy this, copy it over to our CSS, and we'll have a width and height of 70 pixels. And let's see what this does. All right, that's looking much better. Now we want to add some padding to this footer. So what we need to do is let's add another class here, and we'll call it footer row. And for this class, we just want to make some padding to the top and bottom, and we'll make it pretty large. So let's see what I did in this ePortfolio, and you can see when I resize the page, the footer actually decreases in size, and when I increase it, it increases in size. And that's because the padding top and bottom is actually a percentage value, and we're going to use 8%. So if it's a percentage value of the width, then it scales with the width of the page, which makes it look good on every resolution. So let's go back to our HTML and let's add some text inside here. So I'm going to have a GitHub link, and I'm going to copy and paste this, and I'm going to have a LinkedIn. I'm going to have an email. And for the email href, all you have to do, instead of the URL, you write mail to, and then you write your email. And it's literally that easy. Finally, we're going to have our resume, and this one's just a bit different. So we have our resume in our assets folder just over here in this PDF. So what we're going to do is we're going to target it. So we're going to get assets, example resume, and we're going to save this and call it resume. And if we click the resume, you see it opens up in a new tab. If you don't want that, if you want them to download it, then all you have to do is add download and save this. And when you click resume, it actually downloads the file for them. So you can choose what you want. I'm just going to leave download out of it. We'll open up in a new tab for them. But if you want them to download it, that's what you do. All right, next we're going to have the copyright logo. So we're just going to write footer copyright. And we're going to say copyright C 2021 and your name. So David Bragg. And to get the C, just Google copyright logo. So you can take the copyright logo from anywhere on the page. I'm just going to take it from here and paste it instead of this C. And let's see what this looks like. You can barely see it, and we need to put that inside the footer, that's why. And now it's at the bottom, and that's still not in the right spot. We need to put it inside the row, and there we go. So now let's style it properly. Let's remove this URL so we don't keep sending up to the top if we refresh the page. All we need to do that is target this footer row in the CSS, and we'll use flexbox to center it. So display flex, that puts it side by side to each other. So to put it on top of each other, it's flex direction column. To center it horizontally when the flex direction is column, we align item center. And we want to center it vertically as well. So justify content center. By the way, if this flex direction was row, which is its default, then justify content centers it horizontally instead of vertically, and align item centers it vertically. Flex direction just flips it if you make it column. So make sure you keep that in mind. So now let's make our text white. So we'll target all the footer social links. So footer social link. We'll also target the copyright at the bottom. So footer copyright. And we'll make the color white, FFF. I personally don't like the underlines on all the anchors. So I'm actually going to go to the generics. And I'm actually going to turn that off. So after the P, I'm just going to write A, text decoration, none. And now I can actually turn this off. So I can remove it from here since that's generic. And text decoration, none. I can remove it from here and here. So let's just make sure that works. So these don't have underlines. These don't have underlines. Beautiful. We'll add the underline hover effects that you see here. See that beautiful animation? We'll add that soon. But for now, let's go back to our footer and let's space them out a bit. So let's target the footer logo. We need to target the parent for this. So we'll target the parent. We'll add a class footer logo. And we'll add a margin bottom to this. Just to give it some space between the GitHub links and LinkedIn. And we'll add a margin bottom of 20 pixels. And now let's add some margin bottom to these links. So let's see the parent. The parent is called footer social list. So let's see if we don't have a class, so let's add it. So footer social list, margin bottom. Let's do 20 pixels. And let's add a bit more because the image has a bit of white space in it. All right, there we go. That looks pretty even to me. Now I'm going to show you a cool trick to separate these. So let's go to the footer social list. We'll make the width 100%. And now you see they're all shifted to the left. But if we display flex, and if we justify content, I'll show you what center does. Center centers them all. But if you do space between, then it separates them all the way to the ends of the actual parent. And if we do space around, then it separates them a bit closer to each other with some even space around each of them. So you can either choose to keep it that wide, or if you want it a bit closer, all you have to do is just add a max width to this. So 500 pixels, and it's a bit tighter to each other. And that's looking pretty good. So let's compare it. And one thing we didn't add is this animation. So if you hover over the logo, you want to tell them that it sends you back up to the top. So let's just work on this animation quickly. So let's go to the HTML and we'll add that text. So after the figure, we'll add a span and we'll with a class of footer logo popper. And inside the span, we'll have the text top and we'll have the font awesome icon FAS FA arrow up. Save this and let's see what that looks like. And we actually can't see it. And let's figure out why. So let's go to our HTML, look at the span. And it's because the span's color in our generics is set to black, which is the same color as the background. So let's go back to our CSS. We'll target the span, which we called footer logo popper. So footer logo popper. I'll just add a color to white so we can actually see it. And you can see this class is actually the same as this. So all we need to do is add a comma, and we don't even need this, just like that. But you see here, this span is now affecting the children. And as I said before, if you don't want to affect any other elements, you need to position absolute it. So I shouldn't have deleted that class. Let's add it again, footer logo popper, and let's position absolute it. And you're going to see it's not going to affect the elements around it. We'll move it to the right, so we'll go right 0, and let's see where that throws it. And that throws it all the way to the side. And that's because its parent isn't position relative. So let's find out its parent. Its parent is this anchor, which we don't have a class to. So let's just add a class to that, and we'll call it footer. Call it footer anchor. So this is going to send us back to the top. So we'll copy this. We'll go back to our CSS. We'll add this, and we'll go position relative. And watch the top move relative to its parent. So now it's completely to the right of its parent. It's all the way pushed to the right. So now we just need to center it vertically. But before we do that, one thing I don't like is how this margin is on the figure and not its parent. So I'm actually going to move that. I'm going to move this margin on the footer logo, and I like having margins on the parent. I think that's better practice. So go to the footer anchor and paste that, just like that. And now we can go up and we can actually delete this class. Now let's go back to our footer popper. We'll go 30 pixels from the top, and that's in a nice position. What a font weight of 700. And in order to get the hover effect where it pushes out to the side, all we need to do is when we hover over its parent, so let's see its parent, the footer anchor. So let's go to the footer anchor and we'll go on hover. So footer anchor on hover, we want to push it out to the right. And in order to achieve that, we need to target the footer logo. So when you hover over the anchor, the footer logo popper, we want to push it out to the right. So transform translate X 60 pixels. And let's see what this looks like. So bang, and we see it pushing out to the right. Now you can still see the top text when it's not pushed out. So let's put an opacity of 0 by default. Opacity of 0, and then when you hover over it, opacity of 1. Now let's just make the transition smoother. So all we have to do is on the popper, transition all 300 milliseconds, and let's ease. And that's how you get that cool effect. So now when a recruiter sees this, they hover over it and they say, oh, you can click it, it goes to the top, and there we go, back to the top of the page. But one thing I really want to add is I want to make that transition smoother. So go all the way to the top of your CSS file, and let's add a HTML, and all we need to add is scroll behavior smooth, and let's see if this works. So click it, and we get this nice scrolling effect, which is pretty satisfying. So that's actually pretty much it. Now all that's left is like the small things like animations, and link hover effects. This is just to really impress the interviewer. So let's just work on that quickly. So to create this cool hover effect, I don't know if you realized or not, but I actually added a link hover effect class on every single anchor that I want to animate. And this is where the reusable classes come in. So let's go to our generics, and I actually called the class link hover effect. So link underscore hover effect. And we're going to target the pseudo element. So when we're targeting pseudo elements, we need to set the content. We'll position absolute it because we don't want it affecting the position of anything on the page. We'll set the height to 3 pixels. We'll set the background color. We'll just set it to black for now. We'll set the width to 100%. We'll send it to the bottom of its parent, which is the anchor tag. So bottom -3 pixels. And in order to have that effect, we need to position relative its parent. And we can't see anything because I made a pretty big mistake, and hover effect is one word. So now we can actually see the underlines happening. Now what we want to do is we actually want to animate the entire thing. So we'll set the width to 0, and when we hover over the link, so if we go link hover effect on hover, and then we target the after pseudo class, and let's just spell this correctly. When we hover over it, now we want to set the width to 100%. And let's see what this does. So now you can see when we hover over it, we can see that cool underline. And if you see this page all the way at the top, it actually comes from the left and it moves to the right. And to achieve that, all we want to do is we want to start at left 0, and it will move to right 0. And all we need to do is transition this. So we'll transition everything 300 milliseconds ease, and let's see what this does. So now when we hover over it, it comes back, and just to fix that, all we need to do is switch this around. And now we get this cool looking hover effect. But as you know, at the bottom, we don't want a black hover effect because you can barely see it because of the background. So what we want to do is remove this and go link hover effect. We call the class white, and this is when we want to set the white background. And let's see if this works. And that turned the whole element white because I forgot to access the pseudo element. So let's hover now. There we go. And now we'll do the same thing for black. So if we call the class black, then we'll have a background color of black, which is 000. So let's check that up here. Beautiful. Now these classes are reusable, so you can literally copy this and you can use it in any project you have. So I use these links. I actually really like those hover effects. I use them in all my projects. So now we're almost done. Before we move on to the animation section where we see this wave and we see all these elements just fade up and fade into the page, which will really impress the interviewer, we're going to do something really important and make it look good on mobile phones. And this isn't actually as hard as you might think. So let's just go to the bottom of the page and type what I type. So we're going to do @media at max width of 768 pixels. So what this is saying is use this CSS for small phones, for tablets, and large smartphones. So this is when the CSS is going to be used, when the max width of the page is 768 pixels. So you can see if you look at the top right corner, you see the pixels moving. At 768, it's going to hit the breakpoint and things are going to change. So now let's change it. So at 768 pixels, let's make the navigation bar a bit smaller. So we're going to change the height and let's make it 68 pixels. And I actually don't like how it's too close to the edge. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to target the nav. And I'm actually going to add some padding here. So padding 0 to the top and bottom. And let's add 20 pixels to the left and right. And I think that's a bit too much. So let's add 12 pixels, increments of 4. And that's looking much better in my opinion. So back to the bottom. Now that navigation bar is looking good, let's target the heading once and make the font size a bit smaller. So we'll make it 28 pixels. So now you can see this is 28 pixels. We can make this text a bit smaller. So copy this, about me para. It's originally 20 pixels, so we can make it 18. Font size 18 pixels. That's looking much better. So I'm happy how this page looks. Now let's scroll down a bit. And instead of 4 on each, I'm going to do 3 on each because I have 8 elements. But if you only have 4 elements, then I'll do 2 on each. So in order to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to target the language. And if you remember before, we set the width of it to 25%. As you can see here, the width is 25%. So all we need to do is set the width to 100% divided by 3. That's to put 3 on each row. If we want 2 on each row, divided by 2. Just like that. So I'm going to divide it by 3. And I want to center these. So I'm going to target the language list. And I'm going to justify content center. So when you put your icons here, it's going to look much better. Again, if you only have 4, then I'll divide it by 2 and only put 2 on each row. Now let's scroll down to the project section. And as you can see, the row is actually hitting the sides. And I don't like that. So I'm going to go to the dot row. And I'm going to add some padding of 0 and 12 to the left and right. So now we're giving the project some space to breathe. In this resolution, I'm just going to make this text a bit smaller because it's a bit too big, especially when you get to a bit smaller resolutions. So all you have to do is target the text. So let's see what the class is called. Project description para. And set the font size Let's make it 12 pixels. Let's see what that looks like. It's a bit too small. Let's do 14. That looks a bit better. Now let's add some padding on the right so it doesn't hit the wall. So just to test this, I'm going to click this hover and I'm going to press hover just so we can test it out. So now we can click element style, padding right, and we can actually play around with it. So we can go 10 pixels, 30 pixels. I think that looks good. 30 pixels on the right. So let's just copy that over. So project description, padding right, 30 pixels. And let's move it to the left a bit more. So originally it's left 60 pixels, so let's just push it a bit more to the left. And that's looking much better. So let's scroll down. The footer's looking awesome, which is good. We don't need to touch that. Now we need to target even smaller phones, which is 480 pixels. So at 480 pixels, we'll do the same thing. At media, max width, 480 pixels. And this is going to be for small phones. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove these languages and project, but I'm going to leave this contact button here. So I want to make it easy for the recruiter to contact me, but it's not as important to show these. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add on these lists, using Command D, I'm going to target all three of them, and I'm going to add a class called navlink. Now I'm going to target this class, and I'm going to say, if it's not the last child, so if it's not the contact, because as you see, that's the last child. If it's not that, we want to display none. So we want to hide it. And you can see those links disappear. So that's looking pretty good now. Let's actually test it on the phone resolution. So the image is looking good also. These are looking good. All right, now we need to work on the projects. So let's go back here. At this small resolution, what we're going to do is we're actually going to hide the paragraph. So we're going to target it. It's called project description para. And display none. And let's see what this looks like. It's looking much better. So now all we need to do is, first let's center these links. You can see the width of the parent is the entire width. So that's just a giveaway that we can use Flexbox again. So it's called projects description links and display flex JCC, justify content center, and I spelt that wrong. It's hyphens. There we go. Now let's center these two. So project description subtitle, text align center. And let's add some margin on the subtitle. So margin, we'll add a 12 pixel to the top and bottom of it. And I don't know if you could see it, but the gap is actually bigger on the top, and that's because the line height of the H3 is 1.25. So all we need to do is set the line height to 1, and I'll show you what that does. Project description title. If we set the line height to 1, you can see now it completely wraps the text instead of having a gap, and now it's very even. So I personally like this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to reduce the font size just a bit. So font size, it was 40 pixels, let's make it 32. That's looking better. Let's remove this padding on the project description and let's center it. So project description. So what we got to do is remove the padding first and foremost, and then let's see what happens. All right, so now it's looking like this, and I'll show you a little trick to position center. Because it's position absolute, let's push it all the way to the left. We'll make the width 100%. And now all we need to do is text align the center title. And that's how you center the element. So I'm liking the look of this. This is looking pretty clean on phone, on my opinion. And the footer also looks good in my opinion. One thing that's worth noticing, anything under 330 pixels, it's not a big deal if it doesn't look good. So let's just go back up to the top, make sure everything looks good. And I'm liking the look of this. So we got it responsive, it's working on mobiles, it's working on tablets and desktops. That's awesome. Now let's just finish off by making these animate, and it's actually not as hard as you think. If you made it to this part of the video, I'm actually really proud of you, because I know it can get confusing. When I first started, I struggled to get to the end of these videos and I gave up like halfway through, so good on you. I left the best bit to the end. Let's finally work on the animation. So as you see here, when I refresh the page, you see all these cool animations. This is what I really love about front end. And it's actually not as hard as it looks. So let's first start by animating our picture. So let's go to the class. Let's see what we called it. We'll animate the figure. So about me picture mask. So let's Control F, dot about me picture mask, and it's over here. And let's add an animation. So if you look at this, we scale it up and then we scale it back down. So in order to do this, we have to add a keyframes. So we're at keyframes. This is what you do if you want to add an animation. And then you choose a name you want to call it. I'm going to do animate profile picture. And at 0%, we're going to start off by having a transform of a scale of 0. So it's not going to be there. At 80%, we're going to transform and we're going to scale it to 1.1. So it's going to actually be bigger than our image. And at 100%, we're going to scale it back down just to its normal size, so scale 1. So I'll show you what this actually does. It doesn't do anything. That's because we don't actually have the CSS property here. So on the mask, we want the animation property, and we called it animate profile picture. And I'm just going to animate it for 800 milliseconds. And as you can see, it's zooming in and it's giving this really cool effect. But what I want to do is I actually want to give it a delay. So I'm going to delay it by 1 second and I'm going to show you something. So if we go to a new tab, if we open this in a new tab, so if we duplicate, we see the picture's actually there for a second. And that's not what we want. To fix that, all we have to do is add backwards. And now it starts at this. It starts at 0% when we add backwards. But I actually don't want it that long. I actually want it 200 milliseconds. And now we get this really cool animation. Now let's create a fade up animation. So let's scroll down. We're going to add it to the title, the paragraph, and the link. So let's call at keyframes fade up. And at 0%, when the animation first starts, the opacity is going to be 0. The transform translate Y is going to be pushed down a bit, which is 40 pixels. And then at the end of the animation, we're going to set the opacity back to normal. We're setting the transform back to normal. And let's see what this looks like. Again, we can't see it because we didn't actually add it. So what we need to do is go to our class, go to About Me Info Title, write animation, and we called it fade up, 650 milliseconds. And let's see what this looks like. And now you can see it fading up. So I'm going to create a delay a bit longer than the picture, so 400 milliseconds. And again, I'm going to write backwards. So you can see the picture fading in and then the text coming afterwards. And I'm going to do the same thing for the paragraph and the link. Now you can see the link's actually not getting that effect, and that's because we're not targeting its parent. We're targeting the individual elements. So in order to fix that, all we have to do is go to the links, which is its parent, and we need to find that. So search for links. And we don't even have that class, but we do have it in the HTML, so we can just add it. So about me links, and then add the animation, fade up, and now we can see the links fading in nicely. Let's just separate each by 200 milliseconds, just create a bigger delay, and now we get this cool animation fading up one after each other. Finally, let's fade in the image. So all we need to do is at keyframes, at 0%, opacity is going to be 0. At 100%, the opacity is going to be 1. And we're going to call it fade in. And we're going to target the image, animation, fade in. I want it to take maybe 1200 milliseconds. an 800 millisecond delay, and backwards. And we have this really nice looking animation. Now you can play around with these. Don't feel restricted to what I'm doing. You can play around with it. You can have as much fun as you want here. And finally, we're going to create this wave animation you're seeing here. So in order to do that, we actually need the wave. So we need to find the wave. Where is it? It's here. And we actually need to put it in its separate element so we can target it. Because at the moment, it's not in its separate element. And we'll just call the class wave. So go back to our CSS. And over here, we can target wave. But before we do anything, I actually want to have a space here. So the best way to do this, in my opinion, is by adding a non-breaking space, just by doing ampersand NBSP, semicolon, between the two spans. And that creates a space between them. You can also create a margin left, but I think this is better practice. So back to our CSS file, let's actually create this animation. So add keyframes, and we'll call it wave animation. Actually, let's keep the naming consistent. So up here we said animate profile picture. So let's keep it consistent and we'll say animate wave. Having consistent names in your code base is very important, especially when you're working with other people. So it's good to pay attention to your naming even when you're working on side projects, just so you get in the habit of writing good names. So at 0%, we're going to rotate it just 0. Transform rotate 0. At 50%, let's rotate it to the right by 30 degrees. And then at 100%, let's bring the hand back. So back to 0. And let's go to our wave and let's add this animation. So animation, animate wave. And let's do 500 milliseconds infinite, because we don't want it to stop. The reason why this isn't animating is because spans by default have a display of inline, and you can't actually rotate inline elements. So if we try rotate 45 degrees, nothing happens. So what we need to do is display inline block, and this will let us rotate it. And as you see, the hand is waving now. So now we have this wave animation, and to make it not look so robotic, we can actually add an ease. So ease in and out. And it's very subtle, but to me, it does make a difference, and I prefer this. So now we're almost done. I'm just going to do a couple more things just to tidy it up a bit. So on the A's hovers, I'm going to change the opacity, and I'm going to make it 0.7. And I'll show you what this does. When you hover over this, you can see it changes color. And I'm just going to transition it so it's a bit of a smoother effect. So all 300 milliseconds ease. And as I said before, it's better practice to actually call the property. So now it's a nice transition. And the good thing about this is it carries over here. Because we're changing the opacity, we don't need to care about the color, and it automatically animates it smoothly for us. And the final thing, we just want to create a download link for this resume. So go to the resume. And for the href, include the resume in this folder, example resume, and add a download. And just write download, and that's literally it. And your resume downloads, or you can add a target equals underscore blank if you want to send them to the next page. And I prefer sending them to the next page. I don't like forcing them to download anything. If they want to download it, they still can from this icon at the top, which is pretty cool. And one thing I just realized is, although when you hover over these, it looks good, when you hover over these, I don't like how the opacity goes to 0.7. And all we need to do to change that is, instead of targeting A's, we just target the I elements. So these are all I elements, and these hover nicely. And now the opacity of these don't even change. And that's the entire project complete. So we have our landing page. We have this nice animation. When we refresh it, it all animates in smoothly. We have awesome professional transitions happening. When we scroll down, you have your technologies that you're adding here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the HTML and quickly fix this up to make it reflect my personal stack. So now it looks a bit cleaner. And then now you have all your 3 projects. And finally, you have your description where you can even click your resume. It opens up in a new tab. They can download it here if they wanted to, and it downloads down here. And they can even hover over this and send back to the top. And one last thing we got to do, guys, is we got to go to the navigation and go to these Ahrefs, and let's actually create links for them. So this is called, let's see what this is called. The ID is languages. So we have to send this to languages. And let's see what the next ID is called. So the section ID is projects. So let's send it to projects. And finally, mail to your email account. So if we save this, languages, smooth scrolls down, projects, smooth scroll down, and let's just make this projects instead of a T. And there we go. And finally, you can even click these links, and this contact button will send them to their email so they can email you. And it also looks amazing on mobile, on tablets, on smartphones. So we can click this. Look how good this looks. Everything's responsive. Everything looks nice. Can go back up to the top. And there we have it. We can also test the tablets. So let's test the iPads. Again, looks amazing. And now you have a really good e-portfolio that will really impress your employers. Now, I highly recommend using different images just to change things around. You can even change the colors. Maybe if you want to have a blue theme instead of purple. At the bottom, you can even add another section if you want. And you can really make this your own personal website.
Congratulations on making it to the end of the video. I know it's not easy, I've done it myself, but this just proves you have what it takes to become a software engineer. If you're trying to get your foot into the software engineering industry, I highly recommend joining my Discord server. There's more than 1,800 people in it, and it's the perfect environment for you to be in while learning how to code. I'm going to be posting a lot more content like this, so if you enjoyed the video, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on my future videos.